How do you manage 50 years on the road with such an aggressive touring schedule?
Yeah, I guess we started young enough to where we didn't know any different.
There are moments in rock and roll history that stop time. Moments where the news travels faster than anyone can process it, and fans around the world find themselves sitting in disbelief, staring at a screen, reading the same sentence over and over because it simply doesn't feel real. July 28, 2021 was one of those moments. Dusty Hill, the bearded, bass-driving, quietly magnetic co-founder of ZZ Top, was gone. He passed away peacefully in his sleep at his home in Houston, Texas, and by the time the world woke up to the news, the rock community had already been shaken to its core. For Billy Gibbons, the man who had stood on the opposite side of the stage from Dusty for more than 50 years, the silence that followed was unlike anything he had ever faced. They had shared everything. Tour buses, studio nights, midnight meals in cities whose names blurred into one long road trip, the kind of shared history that doesn't have a neat beginning or end. And now, for the first time in half a century, Billy Gibbons was standing in a world where Dusty Hill was no longer in it. When Gibbons finally broke his silence, what he said left fans stunned. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was deeply, undeniably human. The two men had first crossed paths in the late 1960s, when the Texas music scene was a buzzing, restless place full of ambition and sweat. Gibbons had been making noise with a psychedelic blues rock outfit called the Moving Sidewalks, a band that briefly caught the attention of Jimi Hendrix, who publicly praised the young guitarist as one of the most promising players in America. Meanwhile, Dusty Hill was cutting his teeth in local Dallas bands alongside his brother Rocky and drummer Frank Beard. When ZZ Top came together in 1969, it was with a specific vision. Blues-soaked, boogie-driven, Texas-born rock that didn't apologize for what it was. And from the very beginning, it was clear that these three men, Gibbons, Hill, and Beard, were going to do something that most bands never manage. They were going to stay together. And they did. For over 5 decades, ZZ Top never changed their lineup. In an industry that chews through musicians and spits out replacements, ZZ Top stood as a singular example of loyalty and continuity. Dusty Hill was at the center of that. His deep, rolling bass lines were the foundation on which Gibbons laid his guitar work. His voice, dark and earthy, gave songs like Tush, La Grange, and Sharp Dressed Man a texture that felt lived in, like music made by people who had actually been somewhere and had something to say about it. He didn't court the spotlight. He didn't need to. His presence was felt in every measure, in the low end that audiences felt in their chests before they heard it in their ears. When Dusty stepped away from the band's summer 2021 tour, just days before his death, it was due to a hip injury. No one panicked. His guitar tech, Elwood Francis, filled in temporarily while Dusty returned to Houston to rest. Gibbons even joked about it from the stage, relaying a message from Hill that Elwood should give the bottom end to the crowd. It was the kind of easy humor that came naturally between men who had known each other for 50 years. No one in that audience, and no one in the band, had any reason to believe they were hearing one of Dusty's last messages to the world. But that very night, Dusty Hill went to sleep and didn't wake up. When Gibbons later sat down to speak publicly about what had happened, the weight in his words was impossible to miss. It was very unexpected, he told interviewers, explaining that while Dusty had dealt with ongoing health struggles, bursitis, arthritis, ulcers, a broken hip, a broken shoulder, he always seemed to find his way back. He seemed to bounce back each time, Gibbons said. Even during their rehearsals leading up to the tour, Dusty had shown up committed and focused. It was only when they hit the stage for that first performance that Gibbons could see something was off. I could tell he wasn't 100%, he recalled. What haunts those words now is the knowledge of what came immediately after. Before leaving for Houston, Dusty had told Gibbons he wanted to see a doctor. He wanted to figure out what was dragging him down, to iron out what's got me on the ropes. As he put it, he was going home to rest, to get answers, to come back ready. That was Dusty Hill's way. Practical, understated, never asking for sympathy. He went home. He went to bed. And by morning, he was gone. The grief that followed was raw and personal in ways that Gibbons didn't try to hide. In an interview with Variety, he admitted that the news sent him reeling in ways he hadn't anticipated, even acknowledging that the emotion surprised him. "I had a couple of moments with the waterworks coming and going," he said. For a man who had spent 5 decades projecting cool, steady confidence on stage and off, that admission carried enormous weight. "I really felt a sense of relief," he added. "I said, gee whiz, maybe I am human after all." It was a small, honest moment, the kind that sticks with you long after the interview is over. What made Gibbons' silence in the days immediately following Dusty's death feel so significant was how much the public had come to associate ZZ Top with invincibility. Here was a band that had survived every shift in the music industry. The rise of MTV, the grunge era, the streaming revolution, without flinching, without breaking up, without replacing anyone. They were a monument, and monuments are not supposed to be fragile. But Gibbons, in his quiet, measured way, made clear that the loss was not something to minimize. "We lost a great friend," he said, borrowing words that guitarist Steve Cropper had once used to describe losing his own bandmate. The sentiment needed no elaboration. Dusty's health had been quietly declining in ways the public never fully understood. Chronic bursitis had made the simple act of standing painful. A broken hip and shoulder had slowed him down in ways he would never admit from the stage. Ulcers added another layer of internal strain. "You don't necessarily pass away from a broken shoulder or broken hip," Gibbons said, making clear that no single cause told the full story. It was the accumulation, the weight of everything piling up over time on a body that had given everything it had to 50 years of touring. "It was all of it," Gibbons explained. "His hip, shoulder, ulcers. It just became too much." And yet, Dusty's final concern had not been for himself. In those last conversations before stepping away from the tour, his message to Gibbons had been clear and emphatic. "The show must go on. Don't forget it." By all accounts, he said it with conviction, pointing a finger as if to make absolutely sure the words landed. For Gibbons, those words became something more than a farewell. They became a mandate. Not a request, not a suggestion, but a directive from someone who had spent his entire adult life believing that music was worth showing up for, no matter what. The question of whether ZZ Top could or should continue without Dusty Hill was one that fans debated intensely in the weeks following his death. There was no easy answer. The band's identity had always been tied to its 3-man lineup. To many, the idea of ZZ Top without Dusty Hill felt like a contradiction. But Gibbons and Frank Beard ultimately chose to honor their friends' wishes rather than fold. "As an honor to the legacy of the band, we felt it would be more suitable to try to pick up sticks and carry on," Gibbons said. "ZZ Top will soldier on." The choice of Elwood Francis as Dusty's replacement was not a business decision made in a boardroom. Elwood had been part of the ZZ Top family for more than 30 years, working behind the scenes as Gibbons's guitar tech. He knew the music. He knew the people. And crucially, it had been Dusty himself who had asked that Elwood step in. When Francis emerged from the pandemic having grown a full beard, an unplanned but striking preservation of the classic ZZ Top image, something about it felt right, even poetic. "It's quite a trip having Elwood step in to help keep the ball rolling," Gibbons said. "When I see Frank Beard smiling for the first time in 30 years, I know something good's happening." Among the most moving tributes to Dusty Hill came during the band's live performance of Tush, one of his signature songs. Rather than singing it themselves, Gibbons and Beard stepped back and let Dusty's recorded vocals fill the venue. On stage, his iconic hat rested atop a microphone stand. Simple, still, unmistakable. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. People wept openly. Cheers mixed with tears in a way that only happens when something truly irreplaceable has been lost. It was not a gesture of finality. It was a statement that Dusty Hill would continue to be present on that stage as long as ZZ Top played music. The tributes from the wider music world poured in with equal sincerity. Fellow musicians who had crossed paths with Hill over the decades offered words that spoke to his character as much as his craft. He was remembered not just as a technically gifted bassist but as someone who carried himself with dignity and warmth, someone who made the people around him feel the weight of what they were doing together. The mural that appeared in Houston shortly after his death, painted on a wall in the city he had called home, captured something essential about how the community saw him. Not as a celebrity, but as a neighbor, a son of Texas, a man who belonged to that place as much as the music did. Billy Gibbons has continued to move forward, honoring Dusty's final wish with every concert, every studio session, every interview where he chooses honesty over performance. He has spoken about new music being completed, about the creative process feeling both cathartic and necessary. He has described the band's future not as survival but as purpose, a distinction that matters enormously. "We've got tracks coming," he said, "and they're not about sadness. They're about keeping the wheels turning. That's what we do." What Gibbons ultimately revealed when he broke his silence was not just grief, though grief was certainly there. He revealed the full picture of a friendship that had lasted a lifetime, built on decades of shared labor, shared humor, and shared love for the music they made together. He revealed a man, Dusty Hill, who, even in his final days, was thinking not about his own comfort but about the stage, the band, and the audience waiting on the other side of the lights. And he revealed something about himself that he might not have expected to find. That after 50 years of being unshakable, he was, in fact, human. That the loss was real. That it hurt. Dusty Hill's final words to his bandmate were about continuation. They were about refusing to let the music die just because one voice goes quiet. As long as Billy Gibbons picks up his guitar and walks out onto a stage, those words are still echoing. A quiet directive from the left side of the stage, where a bearded man in sunglasses once stood for 50 years, never missing a beat, never craving the spotlight, just doing the work. The show must go on. And it does.